In 1965, two countries were born from the same nation. One became one of the richest places on Earth. The other has been stuck in economic purgatory for 30 years. Malaysia had a plan to be fully developed by 2020. Then $4.5 billion vanished from its sovereign wealth fund, and the dream collapsed. Today, Singapore's GDP per capita is $90,000. Malaysia's? 12,000. That's a ratio of almost 8 to 1. From the same starting line. This isn't just Malaysia's problem. It's a blueprint for how any country can build itself a trap it can never escape. The middle-income trap isn't an abstract economic theory. It's a concrete reality affecting billions. Since 1960, only 23 economies have escaped it. 23, out of 108 currently classified as middle income. And more than a third of those that graduated did so through EU integration or oil discoveries, routes Malaysia doesn't have. Malaysia has been upper middle income since 1996. Its GNI per capita sits at $11,670, tantalizingly close to the World Bank's high-income threshold of $13,935, a gap of just 16%. The World Bank projects Malaysia could cross that line by 2028. But here's the thing, Malaysia has been almost there before. The same forces that keep it stuck, commodity dependence, institutional rot, brain drain, political corruption, are strangling dozens of countries right now. Some economists argue this trap isn't even real, but Malaysia's 30-year stagnation suggests otherwise. Or does it? To understand how Malaysia built its own cage, you have to go back to the beginning, to a time when two nations shared one destiny and then chose radically different paths. August 9, 1965. The Malaysian Parliament votes 126-0 to expel Singapore from the Federation. Not a single dissenting voice. Lee Kuan Yew goes on television and cries. Singapore is the only country in modern history to gain independence against its will. At the time, the gap between them was modest. Malaysia's GDP per capita was $326. Singapore's was $516. Roughly comparable. Tunku Abdul Rahman, Malaysia's first prime minister, let the tiny island go, believing it had no future without Malaysia's resources and hinterland. That may have been the most consequential miscalculation in Southeast Asian history. But Malaysia had bigger problems at home. May 13, 1969. Ethnic riots between Malays and Chinese Malaysians tore the country apart. The government's response was the new economic policy, affirmative action for Bumiputra, the ethnic Malay majority, equity quotas, university admissions, government contracts. The target? Raise Bumiputra corporate equity from 2.4% to 30%. The poverty rate at launch? 49%. The NEP was designed as a 20-year program. It has never ended. It's widely called the never-ending policy. Remember that name, it comes back later. Then came Mahathir. Dr. Mahathir Mohamad became Prime Minister in 1981 and launched the most ambitious industrialization program in Southeast Asian history. His Look East policy sent over 15,000 Malaysians to train in Japan. He built Proton, a national car company, and protected it with excise duties of 60 to 105% on imports. Think about that. You wanted a Honda, you paid double. Proton captured 74% of the domestic market in the 1980s. It collapsed to 12% by 2016 after soaking up 13.9 billion ringgit in government assistance. He built the Petronas Towers, $1.6 billion, the world's tallest building from 1998 to 2004. Nation branding, not an economic engine. He launched Pawaja Steel, a 1 billion ringgit joint venture with Nippon Steel that became the poster child of cronyism. Total losses, 10 to 15 billion ringgit. His friend Eric Cheer was installed to run it. charged in 2004, acquitted in 2007. He created MSC Malaysia, a 750 square kilometre tech zone. Bill Gates sat on the advisory panel. Not a single world-class tech company was born in Cyberjaya. A 2018 think tank study concluded it was a grand ambition that has ultimately fallen short. You can't copy-paste Silicon Valley into a jungle. And then came Vision 2020, Mahathir's promise that Malaysia would be a fully developed nation by the year 2020. It required 7% annual growth for 30 years. It failed. But by 1996, none of that mattered. Malaysia crossed into upper-middle income status. Manufacturing was booming. Foreign investment was pouring in. The future looked unstoppable. The towers were tall. The cars were rolling. The plan was working. But the entire miracle was built on a fault line, and in July 1997, the ground began to shake. The 1997 Asian financial crisis hit Malaysia like a freight train. The ringgit lost half its value. The stock market fell 80%. GDP contracted 7.4% in a single year. But here's what most people miss. The crisis didn't create Malaysia's problems. It revealed them. And Mahathir's response would defy the entire world and set Malaysia on a course from which it has never fully recovered. The cronyism, the over-leveraged mega-projects, the stock market propped up by politically connected money. It was all there, hidden behind a wall of GDP growth. Malaysia actually had stricter banking regulations than its neighbours. It should have weathered the storm better. The crisis just ripped away the facade. September 1st, 1998. While Thailand, Indonesia, and South Korea are crawling to the IMF for bailouts, Thailand for 17 billion, Indonesia for 40 billion, South Korea for nearly 60 billion, all with brutal conditions, interest rates jacked to 32 to 65%, forced privatization, Malaysia tells the IMF to get lost. Mahathir does the unthinkable. He pegs the ringgit at 3.80 per dollar, bans offshore trading, locks portfolio investors in the country for 12 months, capital controls, the nuclear option of economic policy. And then he picks a fight with George Soros. At IMF World Bank meetings in Hong Kong, Mahathir calls Soros a moron and accuses Jews, including Soros, of orchestrating the crisis. Soros fires back. Mahathir is a menace to his country. The next day, literally September 2nd, one day after capital controls, Mahathir fires his deputy prime minister, Anwar Ibrahim. Anwar is arrested September 20th under the Internal Security Act. He appears in court with visible beating marks. The Inspector General of Police later confirmed responsibility. According to economist Jomo K.S., the split was more political than ideological. Anwar had already shifted from austerity to reflation. Mahathir didn't fear a policy disagreement, he feared a rival. Now, did the capital controls actually work? The economy recovered. By 2005, Malaysia was running a $14 billion current account surplus. Harvard economists Kaplan and Roderick concluded in 2002, faster recovery with less social cost. The IMF itself reversed its position, from calling controls retrograde in 1998 to acknowledging them as a stability anchor by 2002. Joseph Stiglitz praised them. But here's the kicker. Researchers Johnson and Mitten found in 2003 that 32% of the $5 billion in post-controls equity gains went directly to politically connected firms. Capital controls weren't just economic policy. They were, and this is a direct quote, a screen behind which favored firms could be supported. So think of it like this. Malaysia avoided mass unemployment. Indonesia's poverty rate surged from 11% to somewhere between 40 and 60%. But Malaysia also dodged the forced structural reforms that strengthened South Korea's institutions. South Korea reformed its chaebols, opened its banking sector, built governance. Malaysia didn't, and growth never returned to pre-1997 levels on a sustained basis. If you followed the capital controls debate this far, you now understand something most financial commentators still get wrong. The real cost wasn't the controls themselves, it was what they shielded. The Malaysian miracle of 1998 was real, and it was also the beginning of 30 years of stagnation, because behind the recovery, a parallel economy was metastasizing. Remember the never-ending policy from earlier. The NEP plus post-crisis patronage created systematic rent-seeking on a staggering scale. The Alibaba arrangement, Bumiputera win government contracts, subcontract the actual work to Chinese entrepreneurs and skim a fee for doing nothing. The estimated cost, about 1% of GDP, 17 to 18 billion ringgit every single year, just vanishing into the patronage machine. Government-linked companies, less than 4% of listed firms, control 42% of the Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange by market capitalization. Let that ratio sink in for a second. Matriculation colleges run a 90 to 10 Bumiputera to non-Bumiputera quota. The country's largest university, UITM, is exclusively Bumiputera at the undergraduate level. The official target of 30% Bumiputera equity, the government says it's at 17%. But a 2006 study estimated the real figure was as high as 45% when you include GLC holdings. The researcher resigned after the report was suppressed. Free Malaysia Today calls it a statistical charade. And here's the part that locks the whole system in place. Article 153 of the Malaysian Constitution makes it a sedition offence to even question Malay special rights. Mahathir himself admitted in 2003 that affirmative action had created a crutch mentality. But dismantling it, that would require changing the constitution. Politically unthinkable. Malaysia survived the crisis, but the cure introduced a new poison into the system. And just when the country was getting back on its feet, the biggest financial heist in modern history was about to begin, orchestrated by a 28-year-old nobody with a Wharton degree and a very expensive taste in champagne. In 2009, Prime Minister Najib Razak creates One Malaysia Development Berhad, a sovereign wealth fund supposed to secure Malaysia's future. Behind the scenes, a man named Joe Low, with no official title, no government role, engineers the theft of $4.5 billion. He funds the Wolf of Wall Street with stolen money. He buys a $250 million super yacht. And as of 2026, he has not been captured. The 1MDB scandal wasn't just a crime, it was a symptom of the disease that's been eating Malaysia from the inside for decades. A disease called the middle income trap. So what exactly is the middle income trap? Here's the simple version. A country gets rich enough that cheap labor no longer works. Wages rise, factories move to cheaper neighbors. But it hasn't built the institutions, the innovation capacity, or the human capital to compete on brains. Think of it as an economic no man's land. Too expensive to be the factory, too weak to be the lab. The term was coined by World Bank economists Indamit Gill and Homi Karas in 2007, and Malaysia checks every single box. Symptom number 1, the brain drain. 1.86 million Malaysians live abroad, 5.6% of the entire population, nearly twice the global average. But the composition is what makes this devastating. 81% of Malaysian emigrants are ethnic Chinese, despite being only 23% of the population. Nearly half of Chinese Malaysians want to leave. Only 15% of Malays do. The Bumiputera system isn't just creating inequality, it's driving out the country's entrepreneurial class. And where do they go? 1.13 million Malaysians live in Singapore, 60% of the entire diaspora. 74% of them are skilled professionals. The World Bank's own chief economist said it plainly. It's impossible to stop Malaysians from moving to Singapore. The currency differential alone makes it gravitational. The total cost of brain drain over 50 years, 1.3 trillion ringgit. The government tried to fix this. Talent Corp has processed nearly 12,000 applications since 2011. Only about 5,000 actually returned. That's roughly 500 people per year against a diaspora of 640,000. And 2,800 government-funded scholars, people Malaysia paid to educate, chose not to come home. Penang alone faces a shortage of 50,000 engineers for its semiconductor industry. Do the math. That is not a brain drain, that is a hemorrhage. Symptom number 2, the palm oil trap. Malaysia is the world's second-largest palm oil producer. Revenue, 109 billion ringgit in 2024, roughly 7% of total exports. And the European Union's deforestation regulation is threatening to block Malaysian palm oil from its largest Western market. Malaysia called it crop apartheid and filed a WTO dispute. In 2019, Mahathir went even further. He explicitly threatened to switch over $1 billion in fighter jet purchases from European to Chinese manufacturers if the EU went through with it. And he followed through. Now here's a contrarian fact that will surprise you. Palm oil is actually more land efficient than any alternative. It yields 3.3 tons per hectare per year, 4 to 10 times more productive than soy or sunflower. The IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, supports this analysis. Replacing palm oil would require more total land and potentially cause greater deforestation. The cure would be worse than the disease. But that doesn't change the dependency problem. And it gets worse. Petronas, the national oil company, contributed 64 billion ringgit in government revenue in 2024. That's 21% of the entire government budget from a single company. But Petronas dividends have been slashed from 50 billion ringgit in 2022 to 20 billion in 2026, a 60% cut in 4 years. Oil reserves? Disputed. A 2019 government estimate said depletion by around 2029. Petronas says 28 to 38 years. Either way, the commodity clock is ticking. You'd think with all these problems, at least Malaysia's neighbour, the one they kicked out in 1965, would offer some sympathy. It doesn't. Singapore is too busy winning. Symptom number 3, the Singapore mirror. Same starting point, 1965. Today, the ratio is 7.6 to 1 in nominal GDP per capita. Singapore, $90,674. Malaysia, $11,867. Despite having 6 times fewer people, Singapore's total GDP, $547 billion, exceeds Malaysia's $422 billion. Corruption Perception Index, Singapore scores 84, ranked 3rd globally. Malaysia scores 52, ranked 54th. In 2007, they shared the same score. That divergence happened in less than 20 years. Singapore runs a fiscal surplus of 4.5% of GDP. Malaysia runs a deficit of nearly 4%. Malaysia has posted deficits in 27 of the past 35 years. And the structural lock makes easy solutions impossible. Can't reform Bumiputra. Article 153 makes it constitutionally untouchable. Can't diversify overnight. 500,000 jobs and 450,000 smallholder families depend on palm oil. Can't stop the brain drain. Singapore's pull is gravitational. Education is in freefall. PISA math scores dropped 32 points from 2018 to 2022, one of the top 5 largest declines globally. R&D spending sits at 1% of GDP, while South Korea spends 5.2%, Taiwan 4%, and even Singapore does 2.2. Every solution creates a new problem. This is the trap: a hemorrhaging talent pool, a commodity time bomb, a political system that can't reform itself. Petronas dividends cut 60% in 4 years. And then came the bill for the biggest theft in Malaysian history, a bill that would reveal just how deep the rot had spread and just how much it had cost. The US Department of Justice called 1MDB the largest kleptocracy case to date. Over $4.5 billion diverted through shell companies spanning Switzerland, Singapore, and the United States. Goldman Sachs raised $6.5 billion in bonds for 1MDB and collected $600 million in fees. That's more than 200 times the typical fee. Goldman's Malaysian subsidiary pleaded guilty, the only criminal case in the firm's entire 156-year history. The settlement, $3.9 billion back to Malaysia, plus $2.9 billion to global regulators. Former Prime Minister Najib Razak claimed the $681 million found in his personal bank account was a donation from the Saudi royal family. The court ruled it was unmistakably from 1MDB. First conviction in 2020, 12 years. Second conviction, December 2025. Guilty on all 25 charges. 15 years. 11.4 billion ringgit fine. He is the first Malaysian leader ever imprisoned. Police seized from Najib-linked properties 1,400 necklaces, 567 handbags, 423 watches, 2,200 rings, 1,600 brooches, and 14 tiaras, worth approximately $273 million. Let that sink in, 14 tiaras. 1MDB accumulated 42 billion ringgit in total debt. Malaysia has recovered 31 billion, about 70%, the highest recovery rate globally. But 24.5 billion ringgit remains outstanding, including 9 billion in sukuk bonds maturing in 2039. Every ringgit servicing stolen money is a ringgit not invested in escaping the trap. Malaysia isn't stuck because it's unlucky. It's stuck because it built a system that rewards loyalty over merit, protects insiders over innovators, and allows billions to be stolen while the nation's best minds flee to Singapore. The middle-income trap isn't a curse, it's a choice. The scandal toppled a government, but did it break the trap? Here's the irony. The 2018 election toppled Barisan Nasional, a coalition that had governed Malaysia since independence. 61 years of unbroken rule ended by a corruption scandal. But Najib's party, UMNO, it's back in the ruling coalition. The old guard endures. The system is remarkably good at surviving its own scandals. But the hope is real too. Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, the same man Mahathir fired, arrested, and had beaten in custody in 1998, finally became PM in November 2022. His reform agenda, the Madani economy, is showing results. GDP grew 5.1% in 2024, surging to 6.3% in the fourth quarter of 2025. The ringgit recovered from 4.70 per dollar in 2023 to roughly 3.97 in early 2026, Asia's top-performing currency. FDI hit a record 378 billion ringgit in approved investments. And most importantly, Malaysia controls 13% of global semiconductor packaging and testing. That's the sixth largest semiconductor exporter in the world. Penang is attracting the giants: Intel, $7 billion, Infineon, €5 billion, Nvidia, $4.3 billion. The US-China chip war is what Anwar calls a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And there's a hidden superpower almost nobody in the West talks about. Malaysia has been ranked #1 in Islamic finance for over 10 consecutive years, controlling roughly two-thirds of global sukuk issuance, 178 billion out of 290 billion. Now, remember the contrarian question from the beginning. Is the middle income trap even real? Some economists say no. They call it a narrative of anxiety, not a deterministic fate. And the numbers are fascinating. Over 60% of all countries have been classified as trapped by at least one academic definition. That's more than the 48% actually classified as middle income. The trap might be more statistical artifact than iron law. South Korea escaped through chaebol reform. Taiwan pivoted to tech. Malaysia has the talent, the resources, and a semiconductor bet that could change everything, if it can dismantle the system it built for itself. Is Malaysia a cautionary tale, a dream deferred for 30 years and counting? Or is it on the verge of the comeback nobody saw coming? The answer depends on whether the country can choose merit over patronage, innovation over extraction, and the future over the past. The clock is ticking, and it has been ticking for 30 years. And if you haven't seen our deep dive into Ethiopia's $100 billion gamble, Africa's bid to become a superpower while 20 million people need food aid, check it out. Links on screen. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your prediction in the comments. Will Malaysia escape the middle income trap by 2030, or is the system too broken to fix?